Well, hey Seth.
Hey Brandon, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. I'm outside today. Aren't I special?
You are special. I'm in my bedroom.
That which is always where you're at, isn't it?
No, I'm usually in the kitchen.
Oh, okay. All right.
Today we're talking about schmoon schmy schmingdom, right?
Yeah, man, this is I'm really excited about this. And I'm sorry it's, for any viewers it's a little bit of a delay here. We almost skipped a week basically, but man, I'm kind of really excited about talking about this because I really like this movie. So yeah, Moonrise Kingdom this week.
Yeah. So just to start out, why is this one? And I felt the same way, but what is special about this one?
Man, that's okay. Well, do you mean special as what's better about it or what's unique about it? Is for a Wes
You could
Anderson
do
film.
both of those, but if you're thinking about so far, Royal Tenenbaums has been kind of the one that's highest on both of our lists. If we're
Yeah.
looking at, that's one we both agree with. So if you're comparing that to other Wes Anderson movies, why does this one? What's better and what's unique about it?
Well, unique, obviously, you'd say like the main actors are kids, like true children, which has never really happened before. Rushmore had Max, but he's a teenager at least. Um, so that's a unique thing. It's also set in a different time era, so it's set in the '60s. Very clear, they tell you that right up front. Um, it's set on an island with a really confined geography. So there's definitely some unique things in that way. I don't know if those elements make it better though. In fact, usually I'm prejudiced against having kids as your main actors because usually it just isn't convincing acting.
Yeah,
Um,
well, also those elements make it to where there's zero diversity in this film at all.
yeah, they're all white because this is what's this, New England somewhere, right?
Yeah, Penzance, a made-up town.
Is it really?
I
I
think
kept
so.
I kept wondering about that, but
Yeah.
you're almost led to believe it's like maybe off the coast of like Massachusetts or something, maybe.
Yeah, new. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, you're up there. It's real white. It's part of this white kids camp. So in situations like that, I guess I think you're being realistic. I guess this is what it would have been like. So I don't know that there's necessarily a need for diversity. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a little mention of the Native American trails and the history.
Chickasaw, yeah, Chickasaw territory. They say, yeah, which
Yeah,
is kind of neat, right? Like that was
yeah,
pretty cool. But man, just watching it, I just think he nails everything that he does in this one, and there's nothing holding it back. Like when I think of a serious critique as far as movie making, I basically say there's none. I mean, I this is one that I almost consider like, is this a 10 out of 10 film for me? Because I just don't have. I mean, I could go on and on about things I like. I don't. There is the weirdness of, and we should probably address this right out of the gate because it's kind of the elephant in the room, I think, on this movie. Like, there's that one scene where the kids are on the beach, they're 12-year-olds, and they're like making out and talking about sexual stuff, which is odd because they're young, but also odd because you as an audience are watching it. And it's like, is this okay to view
okay.
and enjoy?
Let's let's shelve that for just a second because that's such a.
Okay.
I already had in my head that this is going to be such a wide subject to talk about.
Okay.
But I want to briefly say just a little critiques before we go into such a big thing.
Okay.
A critique for me would be I don't feel like the music is as good in this film as it would be in other Wes Anderson films. Um,
Okay,
I
can we
feel
pause
like,
on that for a second?
yeah,
Okay.
let's shelve that for a second.
No, actually, I just want to camp out on that because I actually think I probably like it a little better because it doesn't have. Wes Anderson tends sometimes toward what I find to be generic classic rock, like '60s stuff. That's like, this is just regular '60s song. It's not cool in any way, in my opinion. Whereas this was all like that, like those pizzicatos, and I love that. And then the Benjamin Britten stuff at the beginning is cool. I actually think I place this near the top of his music stuff scores for his
Yeah.
movies.
So the pizzicato thing, that's actually a Benjamin Britten piece. The Noah's Flood is a Benjamin Britten piece. The children's thing where they break apart the Haydn, not Haydn, is it
No, that's
Haydn?
Benjamin Britten, isn't it?
It is Benjamin Britten, but they're looking at a piece that was actually done by Haydn.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's like Benjamin Britten's children thing, looking at a previous piece and then putting all the elements together.
Okay.
I think that's Haydn. I can't remember if that's classical or romantic. Um, but I think the thing that actually bums me out is it's a little bit hitting it over the head to use Hank Williams for every time the police officer is around. I just think, yeah, all right, we get it. You know, he's kind of sums up that music sums it up. So,
But
um,
doesn't aren't those songs kind of perfect for those? Like every time they come on, you're like, cool. Yeah, that's like the vibe you're going for in this, right?
it is. I just can't tell if it's like hitting it over the head. If it's too, I want it to be a little more subtle.
Okay.
But the Alexandre Desplat music is really good, which I'm trying to think of when his original score comes in. I think it's during the flood scene, um,
Okay.
but that's kind of a theme unto itself. So that would be my only critique because I do like some of the 60s music. I liked it in Royal Tenenbaums and I liked it in Rushmore. We talked about it not being used as well in Darjeeling Limited.
Yeah.
But so now that I've said that little critique,
Okay.
let's really get into what I looked up, and I think so. You have pedophilia, and then you have hebephilia, and hebephilia, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, would be when 12 and 13-year-olds, so a little late adolescence, is
Okay.
is the sexual pleasure that's derived from that age range.
Okay.
And it's funny that you say that because when we first saw the movie, we called each other. We both saw it in the theaters. I called you and I said, that part was a little weird to me. And you were like, no, it didn't bother me much.
Yeah. I didn't
But
have
now
the
that,
like I didn't have I just had the awareness to pick up on it. It was just like, oh, it's a scene that happened, you know?
which to some extent, I wonder if having children has changed that. And Elijah's close to that age, maybe now.
That's true. That's true. That could be. Um yeah, that may be. But I mean, you're exactly right. I remember that. I feel like it came out around the time of Cornerstone, like early July or something. And so I must have seen it while we were on tour, and then you were at the house,
Yeah.
and we called each other. That's yeah. I mean, I remember you mentioning that, and you're right. It is weird, right? Like, but so they're the same age, like you said, but also okay, so speaking about human history, we kind of are led to believe that once you are of reproductive age, that is historically how humans interacted, right? So we have a social uncomfortability there because we're not sort of socially ready for relationships yet until we're in our at least late teens, if not 20s or even 30s. But what he shows in that scene is something that would have happened between people that age for thousands of years, right? Until fairly recently.
Well, so the scene made me go deep into some of these things, and I can't remember what the organization was. I want to say it's the World Health Organization, to where I started reading about what is their recommendations for sexual development. When does this occur? And there was a report I read, and this is all obviously natural. You and me may have experienced it differently because we grew up in conservative Christian homes, and I want to speak to that after a little later. But I think this is a natural development of sexual desires and urges outside of, again, those kind of homes. But what's weird about it is, one, you're making actors do this, and two, we're watching it. And then the crew watched it. So this would probably be normal if it just happened between teenagers as they're exploring those things.
In privacy.
Breasts are starting to develop. Boys are starting to get erections. There's all that stuff is happening. But the fact that we're watching it and the actor said it, and they're actually, I mean, I don't know. He says the actor, I wish I could remember her name now, but she says it's hard. So he probably doesn't have an erection, but he does fill her up.
Yeah. We should probably clarify, if any viewers have not seen the film, there is no nudity and there's no explicit sexual activity.
No.
It's that sort of like, between these kids in the scene, it's sort of just talking about those things in close proximity, and then a little bit of feeling with clothes still on. So
yeah. And so to some extent, biologically, as you said, uh, and even now socially, this is somewhat acceptable. Maybe not in religious, very strict religious households, but to some extent, psychologically, this is a natural development. It's just kind of icky having actors do this, which I guess their parents, the actors themselves probably gave consent and the parents gave consent. It would seem like that would be um, uh, important to this.
Yeah.
Crucial is, I can't think of the word I want to use, but it seems like that would be crucial to this.
Yeah.
So it's if you're filming it, it's kind of a true to life situation that would occur between two people who are exploring themselves. And even boys, I mean, at a younger age, will look at each other's penises and kind of see what's different. And I think this is natural. The question I was going to ask is, what age did you start to feel like, these things, that a sexual awareness occurred for you, as well as exploring these things?
It was probably about that age, I think, if I remember correctly. Now the characters are 12. That's stated pretty clearly, I think, in the film. But usually the way that happens is the actors playing those characters are a little older.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the case in this one or not, but those actors might have been 13 or 14 and playing 12-year-olds. But
Yeah.
maybe they were 12. I don't know. But yeah, I think right around that time, probably.
Yeah. I just realized I didn't clarify with hebephilia. The reason it feels like that is because we're older adults watching this. We're not getting any sexual gratification from it, but that's why it feels kind of icky, because you feel like, by watching this, am I participating in something that could be similar to this?
I think that's another key there, is that I don't think that the scene is intended to be very sexualized, like it's not sort of illicit or drawing you in any way. So that, I don't know, I guess because of those things, maybe that's why my initial reaction was just like, I don't know, it didn't feel particularly salacious to me or anything. So
I think it's just weird to think about a director setting that up and then the crew watching it. And again, no one will be getting sexual gratification that we know of from that. But creating the conditions and then filming it, seems weird for that age range. I'm a little later. I can remember, I think there was a lot of shame around sexual, it wasn't ever outright spoken, but this is my perception. You'd have to ask my brothers and my family, their perceptions. But from the religious aspect, going to church as well as within the family, I just feel like there was a lot of shame around sexual desire. So I can remember in 8th grade, a friend telling me yeah, his mom caught him masturbating. And I went, did he go to jail? I had no idea. It seems so out there that I thought it was a crime to even do it.
So great.
So for me, I don't remember, 10th grade was the time that I started to allow those urges and also explore them. And that's really late.
Yeah. That's pretty late. Yeah.
So I was naive, and I was kind of a late bloomer. And even to now, I mean, I'm 36 now, and there's still, I have to work with the shame around it. So I've been exploring, where did I get those messages? And I don't think they were ever outright, except for the church. I do think the church, there was a lot of outright messages.
Yeah.
But for someone who doesn't grow up with that, and here religion isn't really talked about. They do the Noah's flood thing, but it's not really, I don't think any of these children are coming from strict Christian households.
No.
So I would assume this is a natural development.
That's probably true. And we'll have to explore that some other time, on just all of the ways in which that impacts. People talk about this now in the ex-evangelical circles, where people who have left evangelicalism, and they talk about purity culture and how damaging that was for so many people. But so okay, I think we've addressed it enough that we can probably move on to the things that we appreciate about the film, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, the colors are amazing in my opinion. Now, I guess if you don't like 60s So there's one interesting thing about 60s colors, especially like this is early and mid 60s. So a lot of people, when they think of 60s, they think the psychedelic and the hippie stuff from like the late 60s. But this is mid 60s before that's really taken over the culture. And so you have a lot of these situations where it's like big blocks. Like I'm thinking of social services here. She's got the solid blue head thing and the solid blue outfit, and they're the same color, but then there's no pattern, there's no variation, there's no lines, there's no stripes. And it's really offset well by her like vivid red hair. And that stuff happens throughout the whole film. Like when Sam Shashusky's Guardians call, it's like this yellow, and it's like all of this yellow and mustard and kind of light brown coloration. Like that was really common then, and I find it fascinating. It's almost like stunning to look at.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it because I didn't actually think of it too much as I was watching it. But as you're saying it, it's triggering, those kind of memories from watching it, subconscious things, picking up on that. Color, I didn't pick up on as much as like the style of the clothes as you're talking about for that time, and her saying, "Oh, I have my Sunday school shoes," or him saying, "Oh, you brought your Sunday school shoes." And I'm like, "No, they're not Sunday school," but that's how kids would dress then with those high. She had those high knee socks, and he's got the khakis, which would be Boy Scouts kind of look, and even the cop with the what looks like a baseball cap, and yeah.
And the like the plain white shirt with the thin black tie, and man, and the Sunday school shoes thing is funny too, because it's like a recurring joke when they're on the thing later with social services or someone, they're like, she's wearing her Sunday school shoes, and it's just like that's the term.
Yeah.
This is what everyone calls them.
Yeah.
I found that fascinating, and I'm not huge into the 60s like some people are. I just still find the colors just vivid and electrifying.
Yeah, this would be what seems like pre Beatles Indian mystifying kind of spiritual searching, that period before the influence of all that, which I just always think was, I don't know what was existing at the time, but I feel like George Harrison really brought that, to
Mhm.
light. There could have been some other people who were involved, maybe Donovan or something, and Dylan, but I feel like George Harrison is really the one that brought India into America.
Yeah,
Um,
and the drugs sort of started becoming more prominent, but I mean, it's mid 60s, but it still has those like echoes of the 50s, right? Like it's still this sort of like cops are wearing neckties for reasons that sort of escape me.
which I think communicates the idea that this island is isolated from the rest of America.
Yeah.
The fact that they don't have paved roads, the mail comes in by the plane, all those things communicate that they're somewhat isolated in their own little, community.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And
I
that does lend the whole world a little bit of special nature, right?
Yep, that they're just kind of existing. It's almost like The Village. You remember M. Night Shyamalan's? They're kind of existing in this ideal time, quote unquote ideal time.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Um, the dynamics between Francis McDormand and Bill Murray, I think, is so good. Just the two lawyers.
Oh, man.
There's so many things that just little things that you wouldn't pick up on as far as watching a disintegrating marriage.
Yeah.
And one of them is when Bruce Willis's character comes up to communicate that there's a missing kid. They don't make eye contact the whole time, and Bill Murray just saying, "Well, I'm not going to argue about it." That for some reason that's so familiar to me. It's like, well, I'm not going to argue about it.
They also notice that they tip off that they're lawyers because they both refer to the policeman as counselor.
Yeah.
And it's like they're in a courtroom arguing the case against each other. He's like, "I disagree, counselor." And I kept thinking, like, why is he calling him counselor? Like, is that what they called cops then? But then I realized, like, no, they're both lawyers, and they're treating this like a courtroom, and they're litigating their cases in front of Bruce Willis, the cop.
Well, see, I thought they were calling each other counselor.
Oh, maybe that's the deal. Yeah, I guess that is what you call the other lawyer, isn't it?
Yeah.
Probably you say Your Honor if you were talking to the cop. Okay.
Yeah. So that shows the lack of intimacy there too, that they're
Yeah.
calling each other counselor. Not only that, but also communicating through a megaphone.
Which is actually pretty genius. I think that's pretty great okay, once again, a big house, kind of like in Royal Tenenbaums, which gives you
Yeah.
this really great feeling of just sort of room to explore and ramble and be yourself. But yeah, when you're communicating over a large house, it's like you get tired of yelling and wearing your voice out. So she uses a megaphone, which is cool.
It is cool, but it's the lack of like communicating to each in person individually, one on one. It's
Yeah.
more of like, like you're communicating to a group or something that where there's this kind of distance between you instead of this what would be kind of a intimate communication with. And it could, who knows what leads to what's the character's name of the girl?
Oh man, I don't remember.
I need to look all this up so that we can communicate effectively on this.
Okay.
Um,
I mean, you're right that there's so that interchange between the two of them though. While you're looking that up, I'll sort of riff on that for a minute because it's so many things. It's clever and nuanced, but it's also profound at times, like when they're laying in bed, and so there's another the distance between them. They're laying in separate beds, and she says about the kids, we're all they got, and
yeah,
Bill Murray turns and says, "It's not enough." And
yeah,
that's so good and so true about the innocence of children and the way that we as adults inevitably corrupt them and damage everything. But with the megaphone thing, she goes, does it, what does it say, does it bother you that your daughter has run away? And he's like, that's a loaded question.
yeah.
He doesn't even
Yeah.
say, oh, she ran away. He's just worried about like, how do I defend myself properly here?
Yeah, there's an element of defensiveness. How do I say this in such a way? And that's kind of how lawyers would think. Like, how can I say this and communicate this in such a way to where I'm off the hook here?
Yeah.
It's Susie. Susie is the girl, and so that in some way communicates some of the issues she's having with all these emotions that are probably being overlooked. And it's interesting pairing Susie with Sam, who Sam is. They both have these qualities, but for different reasons.
Yeah.
Susie has it because she's in a family where she feels like she doesn't belong. Sam has it because he doesn't belong to a family.
Right.
And they both meet together in that way. And two of my favorite lines from the whole movie are spoken by Sam, who immediately when he comes into the back of the church, he says, "What kind of bird are you?" And I love that, just putting that special, and even her look when the camera zooms in on Susie there. I just love that kind of calling out of like, I see it with you, I can connect. And then the second line is when Susie says, sometimes I wish I were an orphan, and he's, yeah, I love you, but you don't know what you're talking about. And that's a line that I could use anywhere with people I really care about. It's like, I love you, but you have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. Which I remember the line because it's such a great line, but I forgot that it was about that. And I guess in my memory, I thought it was about something like about camping or survival skills or something. But it turns out it's deeply personal because she's talking about being an orphan, and he is an orphan. And he's basically saying, like, it is not as cool as you're romanticizing it to be. It's actually really awful.
Yeah. And so that kind of them coming together could symbolize what we've talked about before. In the piece that's being played is at the beginning and at the end is the orchestra, and looking at each member of the orchestra. So taking apart the orchestra, but then putting it back together at the end.
Yeah.
And I think let's talk a little bit about that symbolism and how Susie and Sam meet, and that somehow in their crossing and in their meeting that brings things back together.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, it brings things back together. This is one of those really interesting endings to me. Like this might have the most typical satisfactory ending. You know what I mean? Like it feels like a somewhat standard happy ending. I mean, it's still got its unusual aspects, but everybody kind of wins, right?
Well, Sam is adopted or is in foster care. We don't know if
Yeah.
he's adopted. I think there's some things that are left unresolved. We don't know how well Susie's doing in her family. The thing that resolves the most is that, the flood is over and there are great yields because of that, similar to, what you would see in any kind of flood narrative throughout history,
Yeah.
or flood creation or flood myth. But aside from, the town improving from this devastating flood and Sam going into foster care, I'm not sure what else is resolved.
Well, I mean, we're not led to believe that Susie's parents get divorced, right?
I don't think so.
So presumably they sort of reach some kind of understanding. So that I think that's a little bit of resolution. Also, part of their distance between those two characters is that Frances McDormand's character is sort of having this affair of some kind with Bruce Willis's character. So they're going off, and that's ended. So that ends during the movie. So there's a little bit of like tidying up of that kind of stuff, and I think that's part of the deconstruction and reconstruction. So you have this family of origin for Susie that is very fractured, and everybody's got these secrets, and they're doing things behind each other's back. Then when they get torn apart, then when things get put back together, it feels like it's put together on maybe a little more solid ground. I mean, maybe everybody's not in total bliss, but there seems to be a lot less deception going on at the very least. People have revealed themselves to be who they are, and everybody's kind of made some uneasy peace about that, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah, and I do think the piece of looking at the orchestra kind of communicates that, is looking at each individual player, and the same looking at each individual person in this story, and how this community comes back together and in that way. But now I'd like to talk a little bit about those flood myths, and I think we have Walter Brueggemann in the waiting in the sidebar. Can we bring him in?
Yeah, that'd be great. I noticed. Oh, go ahead.
Well, since you have a Master's of Divinity, what can you tell us about flood myths and what they communicate overall?
Yeah, that flood myth that we get in our Christian sort of heritage from Genesis 6 is not particularly unique among all of these sort of surrounding cultures that the Israelite community comes out of. So there are very similar flood myths around. And you alluded to earlier, often after the flood myth, things are deconstructed through the destruction of the flood. But then when they reconstruct, there's the higher yields. There is sort of a be fruitful and multiply sort of situation. And I think we get that in scripture and in the story, the play that they're having there at that church on New Penzance. But you also get, you sort of get remade. I mean, it's interesting. And so this isn't common in all of Christianity, but I'm a Lutheran pastor, and in Lutheran understanding of, say, like baptism, we use flood language. Our old selves are drowned in the flood, and then we are resurrected. And I think that's some of what's there in the scriptural reading and in the other cultures, is almost this like rebirth thing. Like the old thing dies so that the new thing can be born, and so you drown the old thing. And I think that's somewhat happens in the deconstruction or reconstruction of the orchestra and these family systems. Like Sam Sashusky doesn't belong in these foster homes, and no one likes him, and he's at odds with everybody. He thinks he's sort of making progress, as he writes in his letters to Susie, but he's not really. Like, and we find that out from his dad. That's a great scene, by the way, when he says, we can't accept him back. And Bruce Willis is like, I don't understand what I'm hearing.
No, he says there's no reason for alarm here.
That's so good. Because you can tell he's so confused, because he thinks he's talking to his birthday. He's like, what does that even mean? Like, you can't accept them back. So they clarify, and I just think that was a funny sort of way for that to happen. But of course, here's my youngest son.
Hey, Adlai.
Hey, he can't hear you. I have headphones on. He's saying hi, Adlai. You want to say hi? You're not going to say hi?
It's up to him.
You want to hear? There you go. Now you can say it.
Hey, Adlai.
Hi.
Hey, buddy. Good to see you.
All right, he's ready to move on. So yeah, I think that's probably the integral part. And I do think that's what Wes Anderson is getting at in these stories. It's like at the initial part of the story, people are in situations they don't want to be in, and they feel like they're misunderstood, and they're having to sort of live a lie to some degree. Then the crisis happens in the case of the flood, and they are able to sort of reveal their true selves, and then operate more at peace with who they are and who people know them to be, and everything sort of settles down in a way that as arrangement that makes sense for everybody. I mean, Bruce Willis ends up happier. He's not having an affair with a married woman anymore, and now he has someone to live at home with as an adopted son. Sam Sashusky now has an adopted dad rather than being a foster child who's always at odds with other foster kids. Susie now has a friend that she didn't have before, and a home that maybe makes more sense. All these sort of things I think sort of resolve in positive ways.
Yeah, so to some extent, almost like the film Magnolia, which let's not say what happens, because if anybody hasn't seen that movie, you just, but there has to be a crisis that occurs
Hmm.
in order for people to wake up
Yeah,
to some
that's
extent.
that's a good point. It's probably human nature. If you read much Flannery O'Connor, she understood that implicitly. She would all of her stories have this bizarre sort of moment in there where things change, and she called them, she's Catholic, she called them violent interjections of grace. And
Oh
so to
wow.
her, yeah, to her it was like these things are happening and then something happens, and often they are grotesque or violent in Flannery O'Connor stories. But then once they happen, then people, the characters start to almost find meaning for themselves or find out who they are through those experiences.
Man, that's such an interesting. I just Googled it because it's such an interesting term. I'm gonna look at that later and read more about it.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. So I think
so
you're right. I mean, crises do. My sense is that that's correct. And in fact, you and I like this TV show Lost, and that I think most of that is brought about by the crisis of their plane crash and their ensuing survival attempts. And I think that brings out who each other really, each person really is.
yeah, I read something. I think we've covered both of those kind of the biblical theme, because I think it's pretty obvious that there's some kind of drawing on this, especially with mentioning Noah's flood over and over again. So there's some kind of biblical thing that wants to be communicated through the. I think Wes Anderson did that intentionally, and that's supposed to be pretty obvious to us.
Yeah.
I read one thing that was interesting going back to the sexual development of the children. It's that the piercing scene was supposed to stand in for the kind of sexual.
Oh, like penetration or something.
I mean, it could be penetration. It could also, and obviously for women who are probably around that age, sex is probably painful the first time, but it's also just this new experience, and the guy is actively playing in it. But I didn't think about penetration before, but that could be symbolism for that kind of what's a good way to put it? This kind of newness and this kind of taking the relationship to the next step, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see
Through
that.
the ear piercing.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, gosh, there are so many aspects to this film, and we haven't even touched on the khaki scouts and how fascinating that whole little village is when they build the tree house, like a whole house, like way up in the tree.
Yeah.
We haven't even talked about Edward Norton's character, and this is his first Wes Anderson film, and it's like fantastic. Like he's like this totally innocent, down to earth, like honest to goodness, like salt of the earth, like everything's on the surface guy who genuinely wants good things for everybody,
And kind of praise. This might be the first time that, aside from Darjeeling Limited, first time that prayer is mentioned.
Dude, and that prayer is so good when he's in there and he goes, "Oh, help us find them. Don't let them die or drown in the goddamn lake." It's like so good. By the way, he has a similar situation they're recording as what's her name, Kate Blanchett's character in a Life Aquatic, where, do you remember, she's on the phone and she's calling and leaving a message for her boss, and she sort of starts and then she kind of drifts off and gets lost in her thoughts. He does the thing, he's recording, it was like it's like he's overwhelmed, he can't even find words to say.
Hey, can you pause it really quick?
Oh sure, yeah, I can pause the recording. Hold on, recording paused. All right, we're back.
So speaking of the khaki scouts, some of the kid actors in this are really good. One of the best scenes, I think, is when they decide to, and this isn't the kid who got stabbed, obviously, but they're up in the treehouse and they decide to actually be for Sam.
Basically. Yeah, comrades. Yeah, they're on his side.
Yeah, comrades. And he says, "Are we man enough?" That scene. But so that we can help him and a part of his brain doesn't get plucked out.
No, okay. Then, so hold on. That's a really great phrase where he says, so a part of his brain doesn't get removed out of him. And I thought that was so funny to say, because you normally say remove his brain or, a piece of his brain removed, but removed out of him is so funny to me.
And then immediately after that, when he's listing the supplies, he goes, "There's no way I can even do it, but
yeah, he rattles so fast."
Yeah. I love that scene.
And then it shows you the list of the things like really fast, like 1 second. And it's funny because it says like 12 bags of whatever, but then it says like something else, and then in parentheses some after it, like I just, I just like every moment of that film, I'm just like, God, that's so good. Like it's only on the screen for like a second, and it's so good.
Yeah, but in a lot of films, kid actors don't do that well.
Right.
But in this one, especially, I love Susie, the actor that played Susie. God, her face and everything, like just her herself, so embodies what a child like that would look like.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just feel like she has the perfect face for it, the perfect mood, everything. There are some times where I have a little bit of doubt about the actor that played Sam. But overall, I think I mean, he does communicate of like what it would be like to be an orphan.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I think he does well, and I noticed this time, I never noticed it before. Uh, in the early scenes of him, like the flashbacks when he meets Susie, his character speaks really softly. So that scene you said earlier where he meets her, he goes, "No, I mean," I said, "Who are you?" And he's like, it's really like almost feminine, like real, like soft and semi quiet. Whereas once they meet and he's sort of in control and he's got his survival skills and he feels confident, he speaks much more confidently and with authority and louder.
See, I was thinking the first time he said it, he says it quietly, but then there's a little bit of like aggressive, confident,
Yeah,
healthy aggression where he says, "No, what kind of bird are you?" But I could see, like, I think when he's talking to her, as he's saying, like, "Well, you can put, leaves in your hair and that'll cool your hair down, your head down," stuff like that. Yeah, he's trying to impress her, so he's a little more quiet and shy. But then by the time they, settle into Moonrise Kingdom, that little area that they've called their own, I think there's a lot of confidence from that. And that could be after the sexual exploration, even though they don't have sex, but that kind of that exploration, maybe he gains a little bit more confidence. Enough confidence to even say to the guy, "Why have you never liked me?"
yeah, yeah. When he goes back,
Yeah.
that's a bit we haven't even sort of touched on yet. Is Jason Schwartzman's character and all of the stuff on. So that's a different island
Yeah.
that they go to, and
They're not hearing me.
that's so good. And he says, like, look in my eyes, and he's wearing shades that you can't see through. Look in my eyes, and he's like, spit out the gum, spit out the gum, spit out.
Yeah.
And then he's chewing gum. Like it's so. I'm gonna keep the nickels. That's my fee, and it's so petty and like.
Yeah.
That's so. I mean, the character is just
character.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. I think he's a great character.
And really, the flood happens on that island too, and so that happens to this dynamic between Edward Norton's character and his commander, who's belittling him and humiliating him in front of all the scouts, and then he has to rescue his life, and it's so, man, it's just everything about it was so just perfect to me, like the casting and the acting and the lines and the colors and the humor, like
That's Harvey Keitel, right? Isn't that the guy?
That's probably who it is. Yeah.
So his assistant, or whatever you would call that, is Eric Anderson. There's where his brother shows up again.
Okay. Yeah. He looked vaguely Mormon to me,
But he also I don't feel like he did a good job. It seems like anytime the camera's on him, he's kind of smirking a little bit.
I don't know. It's a minor character for a reason. I think it's meant to just be this vanilla fill-in sort of guy, So, the whole so many, like when they're just the talking across the things and then calling her social services all the time, or calling Harvey Keitel's character to tell him what's going on, and this guy's an idiot, he's a complete imbecile, like it's. There's the dialogue's great. I could probably speak for 3 hours without stopping about all the different things I like in this film.
I was wondering if this could be considered a coming of age film.
Yeah, I would definitely.
One age
for Sam and Susie for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe not for anybody else, but
I guess when I think of coming of age, is seeing if you think about the movie Moonlight, you see several different ages.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think historically that plot device is meant to be like that loss of innocence and coming of age is sort of like a sort of small series of events that make you mature and lose some of your childishness.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's
true.
it can be a good thing, but sometimes it's kind of a sad thing as well.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point.
yeah.
I guess
Uh,
we've covered everything as far as some of the major things. Um,
yeah, I think too there's an element of, so I think this is Bruce Willis's
First,
first and only role.
yep.
And he, I was surprised regularly at how well, because these are characters we are actors that we know really well, and that can be really hard. There's a challenge in having someone that the audience is familiar with from other things suddenly be in this really unique role, right? So Bill Murray, he does great, and that's why he wanders around. I love when they're searching for him out in the field, and he just like sits on the motorcycle, is like, "What's this thing?" Like because he's so like lost or whatever.
Yeah.
But that makes sense. We've seen Bill Murray and Wes Anderson films, and he always does great. It's Edward Norton and Bruce Willis and some of the others that you just think, how did he get them to do this? And are they seriously that good of actors where, Bruce Willis does this does this sort of thing that uh, he's sort of the sad sack lonely police officer guy, but also has like he's a good dude. And so I thought there's a really fascinating scene with him and Sam in his at his house where he's, "Let me pour you a slug," and then Sam pours out the milk, but doesn't even rinse out the glass. So the beer is in with the
Kind of
milk.
gross.
Yeah, really
Yeah.
gross. And he's trying to tell Sam like how to act. So once he says like, I'm a bachelor, I've never been married, or I loved her once and didn't work out or whatever. And Sam does the sort of the wise and like, as if he knows.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
kind of, I mean, thinking of person-centered therapy, that's a very where you realize you kind of respect the personhood of individuals, whether they're children, adolescents, or young adults or whatever. And I think that's a very kind of person-centered dialogue there. Another thing that's gross is he pours the milk out in the ashtray. It's like,
wait, I didn't even notice that.
what are y'all doing? So
So
yeah,
funny.
Bill Murray, for despite not having success in relationships, he really respects Sam. And despite that age difference, I think there's a lot of respect there. And he mentions his own faults. He's willing to admit his own faults. And Bruce Willis usually plays a tough guy, so to see that vulnerability there.
Yeah.
And then Edward Norton usually plays the villain, and then now he's kind of the fool as well as the hero.
Yeah.
So
Wait, he doesn't normally play the villain, or I guess not in the movies I think of. I don't know.
well, I guess if you think about Fight Club and American History X, it kind of starts in villainhood and then it turns towards something
Yeah,
else.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
But I it's one of those like, it almost feels like Wes Anderson finally like pulled all the right pieces together as far as actors, pulled all the right pieces together as far as plot. But it just, and obviously it's unique in its own way, like we talked about, it being set in a particular place and a particular time. So those things, it's not like it could be replicated or anything, but I just don't see how people could say that. I mean, my wife only likes a couple Wes Anderson films, and that's one of them. There's great nature shots, then they're climbing up and down the rocks, and then the leaves are changing and stuff. And there's just these really great panoramic, like, it's not like breathtaking imagery like Lord of the Rings or anything, because that's not what it's about, but it is this really cool like setting and landscape, and
it's the Sergeant Pepper's of Wes Anderson's filmography. It's almost like there are other good albums, just like with the Beatles. There are other great albums, but everything came together in this one that created something truly. What feels, even though it's inspired by what I was reading, is I don't know if you've ever seen the 400 Belows, but inspired by these kind of similar coming of age stories. It just feels unique.
yeah.
It's hitting the same ground as other films, all similar tropes and stuff like that. But it feels very unique, and it feels. And I think what we're communicating in this is that this would be in the Wes Anderson box set or essential Wes Anderson.
Yeah. Oh yeah, one thing I gotta mention, the character who does the weather stuff at the beginning is sort of the narrator.
Yeah, Bob.
So
Bob one.
Yeah, he's like, what a fascinating, like, so I was chuckling and giggling the whole opening things. It's so Wes Anderson. He's like perfectly framed, like from the waist up, centered. And then he like says a line, and then he's like in a different setting and he says his next line, and then he's in a pose on the next one with his leg on something, he says the next line, so you're like seeing all these shots of different areas around the island while the same character is speaking continuously, but then at the end he enters the story. So up to a certain point he's just a narrator that's totally disconnected, and then he like steps in and speaks and interacts with the other characters. I mean, it's almost, it's not a breaking of the fourth wall, but it's a breaking of like the narrator and character wall, which is really interesting.
I just had a thought. So if we're building off of Noah's flood and we have this outside external thing that's suddenly in, that almost seems like, and I don't think this was Wes Anderson's, I hate to like blur my religious history onto something, but that seems like a Jesus character, that you have someone that enters the story and helps everyone out, and they kind of see, and that's used a lot. And I mean, it couldn't necessarily be Jesus. You could use that for any religion, where someone comes in, explains what's going on. And again, this movie just has a lot of religious orientation.
I mean, even the marriage is weird. I wondered at that, like when they get married by Uncle Ben, you could have made that a non-religious chapel sort of thing, or interfaith chapel, but they have this stained glass with the cross behind it, and he's wearing a stole with, I think, crosses on it. And I just thought that's really interesting because he didn't have to do that, and I wonder why he chose to like make it explicitly Christian, because he doesn't say anything in the wedding ceremony that's explicitly Christian. In fact, it's like this almost he tells them, beforehand, like, it's not binding in court or in the state or by the county or by the nation, or like basically it doesn't mean anything except for to you guys.
Yeah.
But and that is profound in a way as well, right?
Yeah. But I think Bob Babalon's character, and I think that's how you pronounce his name, I don't know for sure, but that is that mythological figure that comes in and explains, ties the story together. And something that's really interesting, I thought was a cool choice, was that he has the lamp on and then he goes and turns it off.
Yeah.
Remember that scene?
Yep.
Man, it's such an interesting stylistic choice.
That is, and it's a one cut scene as far as I can tell, which is really fascinating because he had to time it because the canoes come in right behind him. So he's got to be starting and then do that, and then you see the canoes hit the shore. And I man, just God, every scene I'm going, man, there are like 15 cool things in that scene.
Yeah. That scene especially, plus the one where Uncle Ben is walking with them and there's all that stuff going in the background with the khaki scouts. Those are two very well-timed, well-orchestrated shots.
Yeah. Oh, and we had an instance of the important conversation happening in an unusual setting where he tells them to go talk, and he goes, go over by that trampoline and have a serious conversation, which is a great line. So they go, and sure enough, it's a trampoline, and there's a person that just starts jumping on it, and you can't even hear what they're saying about being married at 12 years old.
There's certain, Wes Anderson does this a lot, where he, there has to be, so as I'm watching Moonrise Kingdom, I thought about this, but there has to be some action going on in the shot that pulls the viewer in, even if nothing's going on. And I think that's very Wes Anderson-ish. And another scene where this happens that I can't seem to figure it out is Sam Shachusky, I think is how you say his name. What is it?
Shashusky?
Shashusky, something. He's walking through the church, and you have like the three little animals who are kids, and then he touches the water fountain to check it. And I'm thinking, what is that? But I think that's something very particular to Wes Anderson, that in every shot, something needs to be happening.
Yeah.
That's a little titillating to the eye, I guess. It's a little like pulls you in as a viewer, and that's one thing where you didn't really know what you didn't really need to know what they were talking about, but you did. Imagine that scene without the kid jumping on the trampoline.
Right? It'd be really weird.
It'd be boring.
Yeah, and you're right. I think it is sort of titillating for the eye, and the scene you're talking about in the church, I think, tells us a little bit about Sam. He's just sort of curious and sort of, I think, bored with normal life, because he gets bored sitting there watching the play. Everyone else is watching attentively, and he's just like, this is dumb. So he's going to walk and find something else out. He's not even going anywhere in particular. He's just wandering aimlessly, and he sees the water fountain. He's sort of like, oh, I wonder, does this work? Is it turned off? And he turns on. Okay, it works. And he walks by, and then like those people have the elephant trunks on. He like, knocks the trunk, just to see like, what does this do if I bounce it? Like, it's like childlike wonder. Like, what happens when I interact with these things, Yeah.
Which has set up in me, anytime I see a water fountain like that, I immediately.
Does this work?
Yeah. This isn't, I think we've covered most of the ground. So this is a little outside of Moonrise Kingdom. But when I see someone like Frances McDormand, obviously Frances McDormand's whole identity isn't tied to the fact that she's in a relationship with Joel Cohen. She's obviously, a person on her own. That doesn't
Yeah.
define her. But when I see her in a Wes Anderson movie, I think about, oh, what would it be like to be at the premiere where Joel Cohen and Wes Anderson are both watching the same movie and talking about it? I wonder, like, if I know this has nothing to do with it, but I just wonder, do they communicate about film outside? Do they have a relationship?
I think that raises an interesting question on, like, they're both unique filmmakers, and you always wonder, like, I remember people would always ask bands this, like, who are your influences? And I think about that in terms of filmmakers, like, because it's not readily apparent to me who their influences are, because to me it seems singularly unique and inspired. Whereas to them, they probably do have things that they feel like they draw heavily from. They're just maybe a little more obscure, or they're changed just enough that no one picks up on them. And I would imagine maybe they do talk to each other because they may be drawing some of the same inspiration from similar sources or inspiring each other.
Yeah, and I mean Frances McDormand's in French Dispatch, so these people are meeting again. I'm sure for the premiere or whatever, and I'm sure there's some kind of talk about, oh, I see that you pulled from this director here and did, because for Wes Anderson, I mean, I even remember an interview where he said, all I do is movies. That's it. All my time is spent. Everything I do is just based on
Wow.
movies. Joel
That's wild.
Cohen, to some extent, may have some kind of outside life because he has children, and I don't know, but I don't think Wes Anderson has children. I'm not sure. I know he's in a relationship, but let's bring him go ahead and bring him into the
We're gonna have Wes Anderson join in now. Okay, well, I think that was
Walter
good.
Brueggemann and Wes Anderson. That's quite a
Yeah. Well, let's I guess we are at about an hour now, so let's go ahead and do our final rankings and ratings if you want to.
Yeah. I wish I could say 9.8, but you won't allow it.
Actually, what's funny is I used to do exactly that. I would make everything half numbers, like when I was in high school and college rating albums, but I would make a caveat for 9.8 or 9.9, which is to say, like, this is basically a 10 out of 10, but I do have this just one small critique, because I feel like 10 out of 10 should say I literally have nothing wrong with it. And if I can say anything negative about it, it's not really a 10 out of 10. But
And
if it's really minor, you don't want to knock it way down,
yeah, that's why I couldn't give this a 10.
Okay.
Because again, that there's the assumption of perfection.
Yeah.
There.
So you're at like either a 9.5 if that's the highest under 10 allowable, or 9.8. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'd say the same. I mean, honestly, I think if they could have just maybe somehow been slightly more creative, other than the touching her breast and saying it's hard, everything else was probably fine there. If they had just kissed and then gone on and done the ear piercing thing, and then they wake up together in the tent, like, that probably would have been, I feel like that could have been just as successful as communicating what happened between them without making it awkward. And I think if that had been the case, it probably would have been a 10 out of 10 for me.
It's interesting hearing your views on this now as a father.
Yeah. I mean, my views are definitely, or my understanding or whatever has changed. Whether it's because I'm a dad or not is a good question. But yeah, for sure. So okay, so then are you saying this is your favorite Wes Anderson movie?
Ooh, boy, favorite is such a hard term to look on this, because when I watch as I told you earlier, when I watch Royal Tenenbaums, I'm like, oh, this is so good, this is the best. And then when I watch Moonrise Kingdom, I'm like, oh, this is so good, this is the best. And I know next week when I watch Grand Budapest, I'm going to say, oh, this is so good, this is the best.
I won't say that.
Yeah, you won't say that, but I don't think I can use a term like favorite with these movies, because they all mean so much to me. There are some that are where the things do align better than in others, but I couldn't say favorite because, again, when I'm in, you and I have communicated this before, but if I have a really bad week, I can watch a Wes Anderson movie and just feel better. And so because there's that emotional connection, it's like picking your favorite son. They're also meaningful to me.
Yeah. Okay. I think I can say without any problem with my conscience that it's my favorite. It's and in my opinion,
All right.
it's the best.
Let's bring your conscience into the chat.
Okay. So we have that. Oh, yeah. Did you look at what the scores, the critic scores
No.
were on this?
I'd have to go get the thing. Do you want me to do it?
No, that's okay. We gotta
Okay.
wrap it. Well, let's maybe start next week's episode with that and do that for both things. So actually we should talk briefly about scheduling here for the next episode. On the original schedule, there were 2 shorts that are connected to Moonrise Kingdom that we were going to watch, but at this point, it probably makes more sense just to skip that and go right to Grand Budapest sometime in the next week or so. And then we're basically on to French Dispatch.
Yeah, the following week, right? The 28th or something?
22nd.
22nd. So yeah.
Now, that's if you can find it. So I don't have a place in my town I can watch on that date, but I did find a place in Milwaukee, an art house theater in Milwaukee that's only an hour away, that they don't have a release date yet for it, but they said, the guy did email me back and he said, normally limited release things like this start in New York and LA. And then after a week or two, they make their way into other major cities before going even to things beyond that. So he said, we don't know for sure. This was a month ago. He said, we don't know for sure when we'll have it. Right now, we're penciling in November 5th, which is 2 weeks later. But he said,
I thought it was countrywide distribution on October 22nd.
Maybe, but I can't find a place. I haven't been able to find tickets yet. Let me know if you can find something. But so you may see it. We'll have to figure that out if you're seeing it, if we're seeing it at different times or on different days. Because I would love to see it on the 22nd, but maybe Chicago will have some, but that's a lot. That's like all day by the time I drive down, see the movie, and come back. So I'll have to see what that's like, but maybe it's worth it.
There's something I wanted to tell you that I've been wanting to tell you for a long time.
Yeah.
I'm Brandon Michael Williams.
And I'm Seth Andrew Hecox.
And together we're
intentionally Wes
Anderson.
You go too slow.
I'll see you.
All right. See you.
Okay.